демонстрация инвестиционного, экономического и туристического потенциала Пермского края. На этой презентации будут представлены экспозиция, которая демонстрирует достижения данного российского региона в сфере социально-экономического развития, а также раскрывающего уникальное культурно-историческое наследие. На мероприятие приглашены главы дипломатических миссий, представители российских и зарубежных средств массовой информации, и запланировано выступление министра иностранных дел России Сергея Лаврова, а также губернатора Пермского края Дмитрия Николаевича Махонина. Это, естественно, не вся информация о графике, она будет корректироваться, она будет подтверждаться, и по мере поступления новой информации будем вас обязательно информировать, как, собственно говоря, это и происходит. Переходим к актуальной международной повестке. Ситуация вокруг Украины. Киевский неонацистский режим продолжает атаковать гражданские объекты, терроризировать мирное население. За минувшую неделю от украинских обстрелов и ударов беспилотников пострадали 99 человек, из них 15 погибли, 84 ранено, в том числе 4 детей. При этом в период проходивших с 23 по 24 января в Абу-Даби переговоров в формате Россия, США, Украина по урегулированию украинского кризиса. После них ВСУ усилили преднамеренные атаки по гражданскому населению, по мирному населению, в том числе по машинам скорой помощи. Я приведу несколько только фактов подтверждения упомянутого. Посмотрите, Белгородская область, 21 по 23 января от атак вражеских беспилотников в селах Архангельская, Грузская, город Грайворон пострадали 7 человек. 23 января украинский дрон атаковал служебный автобус на участке автодороги Головчино-Масычево, ранило 5 человек. С 24 по 27 января от ударов беспилотников ВСУ в Шебекино погиб мирный житель. Пострадали 2 человека. 24 января враг совершил массированный обстрел Белгорода. Были использованы 24 боеприпасов, в том числе из РСЗО «Хаймарс» шел обстрел. 25 января в результате удара дрона в пункте Красная Яруга получили ранения 3 человека, включая 5-летнего ребенка. 27 января в результате детонации беспилотника во время восстановительных работ в селе Новостроевка 1 пострадали 2 работника. В селах Замостье, Зазули дронами были ранены, опять же, мирные жители, на этот раз 7-летняя девочка, а также водитель грузовика. 28 января от ударов дронов по автомобилям в селах Погромец, Новая Таволжанка погиб мирный житель. 1 человек получил ранение. Брянская область, 23 по 24 января в результате налета дронов в селах Олейниково, Горожанка, Воронок пострадали 3 мирных жителя. В ночь на 25 января враг совершил попытку комбинированной атаки на регион с применением нескольких реактивных снарядов «Хаймарс» и 18 при этом было использовано беспилотников, они были все сбиты. 26 января при отражении ударов ВСУ с помощью зенитной ракеты С-200 от упавших на жилой сектор фрагментов этой ракеты пострадала женщина. 27 января в деревне Горица дроны камикадзе ранили мирного жителя. Запорожская область, 24 января беспилотник ВСУ прицельно ударил по машине скорой помощи в Энергодаре. Она ехала на экстренный вызов. К счастью, врачи и водитель не пострадали. В тот же день из-за атак беспилотников по 3 гражданским автомобилям в Васильевском муниципальном округе и в городе Васильевке пострадали подросток и 3 мужчин. 26 января в городе Васильевке украинские боевики вновь осознанно применили дрон против машины скорой помощи, которая доставляла в больницу женщину, получившую ранение от другой атаки беспилотника. В итоге пострадали 2 медработника. В тот же день в селе Басань беспилотник ударил по гражданскому автомобилю. Был ранен мирный житель. 28 января от атаки дрона в Энергодаре погибла женщина. Курская область. 25 января в результате атаки дрона ВСУ на гражданский автомобиль на дороге между деревнями Михайловка и Щекино получили ранения Получила ранение 55-летняя женщина. Херсонская область. С 21 по 23 января от ударов беспилотников и обстрелов в городах Каховка, селах Старая Сбурьевка, Новая Сбурьевка на трассе Костогрызово-Паде пострадали 7 человек. 24 января боевики ВСУ совершили целенаправленную атаку в городе Голая Пристань на автомобиль скорой помощи, в котором находилась ехавшая на вызов к тяжело больному пациенту бригада медиков Алешкинской центральной районной больницы из 3 человек. Все они погибли. Соответствующие комментарии мы сделали тогда же, в день трагедии. А когда укронацисты нанесли удар по зданию поликлиники в городе Каховка, слава богу, тогда обошлось без пострадавших. 27 января в результате сброса боеприпаса с беспилотника в селе Старая Сбурьевка ранен мирный житель. За все они получают свое наказание. Российские правоохранительные органы продолжают привлекать к уголовной ответственности украинских военных преступников, иностранных наемников. К пожизненному лишению свободы приговорен Ахмаджон Курбонов, признанный виновным в совершении 17 декабря 2024 года теракта, в результате которого погибли начальник войск радиационной, химической, биологической защиты Вооруженных сил Российской Федерации Игорь Анатольевич Кириллов и его помощник Илья Поликарпов. Длительные сроки заключения получили еще 3 соучастников преступления. Роберт Сафарян, он получил 25 лет, Батухан Тачиев, 22 года, Рамазан Падиев, 18 лет. Расследование в отношении других объявленных в международный розыск пособников теракта, включая одного проживающего на территории Европейского Союза, гражданина Украины, продолжается. К 14 годам лишения свободы заочно приговорен финский наемник Хари Вяйсинин. Он участвовал в боевых действиях в составе ВСУ и объявлен международный розыск. Наказание в виде 23 лет заключения назначено украинскому боевику Леониду Чепе в марте 2022 года по приказу ранее осужденного на пожизненный срок лишения свободы командира Леонида Анупка, расстрелявшему в поселке Мирный города Мариуполя из гранатомета 2 мирных жителей. От полученных ранений они погибли на месте. Передано в суд дело в отношении командующего силами беспилотных систем ВСУ Роберта Броуди. Он отдал приказ о подрыве 26 марта 2025 года, заложенного на автодороге в Курской области взрывного устройства. В результате пострадала съемочная группа Первого канала. Тогда погибла корреспондент Анна Прокофьева. Ранения получили оператор и сопровождавшие их лица. Устанавливаются другие соучастники этого преступления. Но на этом фоне у Зеленского продолжались гастроли. Хотя на прошлой неделе он, вспомнив о том, что у него есть сограждане, заявил о том, что вроде как в Давос не поедет. Дело в том, что сначала он получил отказ от, так сказать, каких-то там важных встреч, соответственно, выдал это все за собственное нежелание ехать в Давос, мол, он не может покинуть Украину, которая оказалась вот в сложной ситуации. Он, правда, не добавил, что по его вине, и не сказал, что это он и вся его гоп-компания на Банковой стали причинами нынешнего плачевного состояния дел на Украине, в том числе и энергетического кризиса. Но как только замаячила перспектива беседы с хозяином Белого дома, Зеленский моментально забыл о страданиях миллионов соотечественников, которые сидят без света, воды, тепла, и стремглав примчался 22 января в Швейцарию на аудиенцию. Беседа с американским лидером его, видимо, настолько вдохновила, что после нее он принялся упрекать европейских союзников в пассивности, нерешительности перед лицом мифической российской угрозы, призывал их сплотиться для усиления натиска на Россию, по его словам. Нужно, как сказал Зеленский, наращивать санкции и продолжать вооружаться до зубов. Помните, да, они недавно все заходились в экстазе относительно того, что Россия якобы мира не хочет. Вот никто почему-то не обратил внимания на то, что мир не хочет Зеленский. Он обмолвился о готовности Киева показать европейцам, как нужно бороться с Россией. Например, потопив опять же, это его слова, корабли ВМФ России у берегов Гренландии или уничтожив российские заводы по производству ракет, открыто подталкивал собственных спонсоров к авантюрным действиям против размещенного в Белоруссии ракетного комплекса «Орешник». Вот просто послушайте дословно, это цитата. «Действуйте сейчас, — сказал Зеленский, — на суше, в воздухе, на море». Он забыл добавить, знаете, мне кажется, действуйте как Украина и получите такие же результаты. Чтобы построить новый...
I would like to just mention some of the facts. Let's look at the Belgrade regime continues tourism potential of
Добрый день. Добрый день.
Good afternoon. I welcome everyone at the press center of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs at our weekly briefing. We begin with the schedule of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. On February the 5th, the Cultural Center of the Main Directorate for International Cooperation under the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs will host a presentation on the investment, economic and tourism potential of the Perm region. The event will feature an exhibition showcasing the achievements of this Russian region in the field of socio-economic development, as well as revealing its unique cultural and historical heritage. Heads of diplomatic missions and representatives of Russian and foreign media outlets have been invited to attend this event. Speeches are planned by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Perm Krai Governor Dmitry Mahonin. That is, of course, not the full information on the schedule. It will be followed up on, it will be updated as more information comes to light, and we will keep you informed as we have been doing systematically. Now, as for the relevant international agenda on the situation around the Ukraine, the Kiev neo-Nazi regime continues to attack civilian targets, terrorizing the peaceful population of Russia. Over the past week, Ukrainian shelling and UAV strikes have been launched against 99 people. Of these, 15 were killed and 84 wounded, including 4 children. At the same time, during the Russia-US-Ukraine talks on resolving the Ukrainian crisis held in Abu Dhabi on January 23rd, 24th, and after them, the armed forces of Ukraine intensified their deliberate attacks on the civilian population, including ambulances. I would like to just mention some of the facts. Let's look at the Belgrade region. On January 21st, 23rd, 7 people were injured in attacks by enemy UAVs in the villages of Arkhangelskoye and Gruskaya Graivoron. On January 23rd, a Ukrainian drone attacked a service bus on the Golovchino-Masachevo highway, injuring 5 people. From January 24th to 27th, a civilian was killed and 2 people were injured in Shebekino by strikes from Ukrainian armed forces drones. On January 24th, the enemy carried out a massive shelling of Belgrade, using 24 rounds of ammunition, including from the HIMARS multiple launch rocket system. On January 25th, after a drone strike in Krasnaya Yaruga, 3 people, including a 5-year-old child, were injured. On January 27th, 2 workers were injured as a result of a drone explosion during restoration work in the village of Novostroyevka Pervaya and in the villages of Zamostye and Zazuli. Drones injured, once again, civilians. This time it was a 7-year-old girl and a truck driver. On January 28th, a civilian was killed and 1 person was injured by drone strikes on cars in the villages of Pogromets and Novaya Tevelzhang, Bryansk region. On January 23rd, 24th, 3 civilians were injured as a result of a kamikaze drone attack in the villages of Alenikova, Gorozhanka, and Voronok. On the night of January 25th, the enemy attempted a combined attack on the region using several HIMARS rocket projectiles and 18 drones, all of which were shot down. On January 26th, while repelling an attack by the armed forces of Ukraine with an S-200 anti-aircraft missile, a woman was injured by fragments that fell on a residential area. On January 27th, in the village of Gorytsy, kamikaze drones wounded a civilian. Zaporozhye region. On January 24th, the Ukrainian armed forces drone targeted an ambulance in Energodar that was responding to an emergency call. Fortunately, the doctors and driver were not injured. On the same day, a teenager and 3 men were injured in drone attacks on 3 civilian vehicles in the Vasilyevsky municipal districts and the city of Vasilyevka. On January 26th, Ukrainian militants deliberately used the drone against an ambulance in Vasilyevka that was transporting a woman injured in another drone attack against the hospital. As a result, 2 medical workers were injured. On the very same day, in the village of Basan, a drone struck a civilian vehicle, injuring a civilian. On January 28th, a woman was killed in the drone attack in Energodar, Kursk region. On January 25th, a 55-year-old woman was injured as a result of a Ukrainian armed forces drone attack on a civilian vehicle on the road between the villages of Mikhailovka and Shekino, Kherson region. From January 21st to 23rd, the villages of Staraya Zburyevka, Nova Zburyevka, and on the Kostogryzovo body highway. On January 24th, Ukrainian armed forces militants carried out a targeted attack in Golaya Pristin on an ambulance carrying a team of 3 medics from the Aloshinskaya Central District Hospital who were responding to a call about a seriously ill patient. All of them were killed. We made a corresponding comment following the tragedy. On the same day it happened, at the same time, Ukrainian terrorists struck a clinic in the city of Kakhovka. Fortunately, there were no casualties. On January 27th, a civilian was wounded as a result of ammunition being dropped from a drone in the village of Staraya Zburyevka. They all received punishments for all these crimes. Russian law enforcement agencies continue to bring Ukrainian war criminals and foreign mercenaries to justice. Life imprisonment was given to Ahmadjon Hurbanov after being found guilty of committing on December 17, 2024, a terrorist attack which resulted in the deaths of Igor Kirillov, commander of the Russian Armed Forces Radiation, Chemical and Biological Protection Troops, and his assistant, Ilya Polikarpov. 3 other accomplices in the crime received long prison terms. Robert Safaran, who received 25 years, Baduhan achieved 22 years, and Ramazan Paziv 18 years. The investigation into other accomplices in the terrorist attack who are wanted internationally, including 1 Ukrainian citizen residing in the EU, is ongoing. Finnish mercenary Harry Vaisinen, who participated in combat operation as part of the armed forces of Ukraine, was sentenced in absentia to 14 years in prison. He has been placed on the international wanted list. Ukrainian militant Leonid Chepi was sentenced to 23 years in prison in March 2022 on the orders of Leonid Anupka, a commander previously sentenced to life imprisonment, who shot 2 civilians with a grenade launcher in the village of Myrny, Mariupol. They died on the spot from their injuries. The case against the commander of the Ukrainian Armed Forces Unmanned Systems, Robert Brovdy, has been referred to court. On March 26, 2025, he gave the order to detonate an explosive device planted on a highway in the Kursk region, which resulted in injuries to a film crew from Channel 1. Correspondent Anna Prokofyeva was killed, and the cameraman and accompanying persons were injured. Other accomplices in this crime are being identified. Against this backdrop, Zelensky continues his tour, although last week, apparently remembering he has compatriots, he stated that he would not be visiting Davos. First of all, he received refusal for some meetings, and he presented it as his lack of desire to visit Davos due to his being unable to leave Ukraine as it finds itself in a difficult situation. But he did say it was not his fault, and he and his team, he did not mention how they are behind the current situation in the energy crisis in Ukraine. But as soon as the chance arose for a conversation with the White House host, he instantly forgot about the suffering of millions of his compatriots and immediately rushed to Switzerland for an audience with Trump. And the conversation with the American leader apparently inspired him so much that afterwards he began to reproach his European allies for their passivity and indecision in the face of the mythical Russian threat, calling on them to unite to increase pressure on Russia. As he said, it's necessary to step up sanctions, continue to arm themselves to the teeth. Do you recall how they were high on proving that Russia is not eager to achieve peace, but no one mentioned how Zelensky is not eager to achieve peace. At the same time, Zelensky mentioned Kyiv's readiness to show Europeans how to fight our country. For example, once again, his words, by sinking Russian Navy ships off the coast of Greenland or destroying Russian missile production plants, he openly pushed his own sponsors to take adventurous action against the Oreshnik missile complex located in Belarus. Just listen, I will provide his direct quote. Act now, on land, in the air, at sea. But he forgot to mention, act just like Ukraine, you will receive the same result. To build a new global order. He already achieved in building a new local order, so I believe he knows what he's talking about. A new global order cannot be built with words alone. Europe must build a better world, and of course a world without wars, he added. But for this, Europe needs strength, as he says. We're ready to become part of a Europe that really matters and has tangible great power. Today we need this power, said Zelensky, to protect our own independence. But you also need Ukraine's independence, he went on, in appealing to the EU. Because tomorrow, you, I believe he's referring to Western Europeans, may have to defend your way of life. I'm scared to ask against whom. Who exactly will they have to protect their way of life against? Was he referring to Greenland, perhaps? And, as he went on, when Ukraine is with you, I believe it's with the EU, no one will wipe their feet on you. End of quote. Well, it appears that they will simply be wiping their feet on Ukraine and will no longer tread mud on their boots to European Union. In short, it's not just the nonsense of a madman, it's the madness of an aggressive madman. It's aggressive rhetoric once again was present, and surely there isn't any desire for peace here. What other figures is Zelensky painting in the political discourse? From Davos, he moved on to Vilnius, where on January 25th, in the format of the Lublin Triangle, he met with the presidents of Lithuania and Poland, as well as the so-called, as they love calling it, leader, that's what they call it, of the Belarusian opposition, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. She has different nicknames. She goes from being the leader of the opposition to the representative of the Belarus as a whole, but this time with the leader of the opposition. The formal reason for these meetings was the commemorative events marking the 163rd anniversary of the start of the Polish uprising of 1863-1864. Astonishing what kind of pretext united them, because this event is notorious to any unbiased historian or anyone who truly cares for history for the rebels' brutal terror against peasants and Orthodox priests. These uprising aimed to revive the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and encompassed the Kingdom of Poland, Lithuania, and the Grodno and Vilnius regions, which were partially or completely located on the territory of modern Belarus. Kiev had nothing to do with those events, but for Zelensky, that doesn't matter. All he cares about is to keep up with his Russophobic buddies and get their support in the fight against Russia. And here, any means is good. As for others and what they felt, and here I mean Tikhanovskaya, as for the commemoration of date when her predecessors suffered terror, that's quite curious. It was also announced that Lithuanian universities would join the so-called Global Coalition for Ukrainian Studies, an initiative by Bankova to study Ukraine from the perspective of the myth of so-called centuries of enslavement, as they call it, by the Russian Empire. I believe this is clearly a case of collective Russophobic indoctrination. The Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, highlighted some details of another event on his social media account on the X platform, highlighting the event that took place in Europe on the informal EU summit held in Brussels on January 22nd. According to him, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen presented EU leaders with a roadmap for Ukraine's development. You see, everyone continues to contribute to someone's development, so he tells the West how they should develop when it comes to Ukraine, and the Western Europe is sharing with Zelensky how Ukraine should develop from the point of view of Western Europe. So this roadmap, which provides for the fulfillment of all of Kiev's demands, accelerated accession of the country to the EU in 2027, allocation of 800 billion euros for its post-conflict reconstruction, 700 billion euros for military aid over 10 years, and additional funding for the period up to 2040, just as small expenses. Of course, Budapest will not pay for this, as the leaders stated. Clearly, the EU leadership is determined to continue to indulge the neo-Nazi regime of Zelensky, which is mired in large-scale corruption. Brussels' policy of using Ukraine as an anti-Russian springboard, which runs counter to the interests of ordinary Europeans, remains the only narrative that they're sticking with to this day. And in Ukraine, on January 22nd, they celebrated the Unity Day, a holiday that was established in honor of the signing on January 22nd, 1919, of the Act of Reunification of the Ukrainian People's Republic and the West Ukrainian People's Republic. This so-called event was purely symbolic, since by the end of 1919, this new entity had ceased to exist. History shows that the leadership of the Directory of the Ukrainian People's Republic, which announced the aforementioned so-called act, did not even control half of the territory of the supposedly united country at that time, as they referred to it back in the day. The left bank was almost completely under Bolshevik control. Many areas in the south were controlled by the troops of Nestor Makhno and other Ottomans. The Entente forces were stationed in the Black Sea region, and the Poles occupied significant territories in the west. And literally 2 weeks after the pompous proclamation of the so-called Act of Unification, that they're now celebrating as some fated event, the Director and its troops fled Kiev, which was entered on February 5th, 1919 by Red Army regiments under the command of Nikolai Shorts and Vasily Bozhenko. So since 1999, Kiev had decided to celebrate Unity Day at the state level as a symbol of the country's unity. So they found something to unite around. Same as the Ukrainian anthem, not to be united by flourishment or development, but by something else. So here we're witnessing the same case. They found a symbol that didn't even last an ordinary period of time. it immediately crumbled in 1919. And just last Thursday, on January 22nd, so-called celebrations for this occasion took place mainly in the western regions of Ukraine. And they celebrated both Unity Day and the 108th anniversary of the proclamation of independence of the Ukrainian People's Republic, completely forgetting that it was the head of its territory, Petlura, who surrendered Galicia and Volhynia to the Poles. This is such a stark, horrific compilation of nonsense that is being presented to the people as an event that I find it really hard to understand who is getting these ideas, who comes up with the ideas of these events. Perhaps they're not in Ukraine. The organizers of the celebrations also stayed silent about another participant in the union. Although little people paid attention to this, the celebrations were not particularly large scale. The exception was Lvov, where around 200 people, mainly local students, gathered. All this is not surprising. People are busy not only many social and everyday problems, but are simply trying to survive in the conditions of a brutal police dictatorship raging in the country. They clearly have no time for holidays or celebratory events, especially those imposed by local authorities on dubious historical dates. And what kind of unity can we talk about when Zelensky regime continues to divide society due to linguistic, national, religious, and class lines, imposing on it an alien neo-Nazi ideology based on historical lies, the cult of false symbols, and contempt for its own people. And all this he is allowed to do, and all this is aided by the cultural censorship in Ukraine. On January 21st, Ukrainian media published the response of the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture regarding the participation of leading soloists of the National Opera of Ukraine, People's Artist of Ukraine, Natalia Matsaka, and Sergei Krivakon in performances of Swan Lake during their vacation abroad. They dared to participate in the classic ballet. And what do you think? What was the verdict of the regime? It was the following. And this is the official position of the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture. The renegades promoted, now is a direct quote, the product of an aggressor country, violating, once again a direct quote, the theater's general principled position on excluding works by Russian composers from its repertoire. The Ministry of Culture also announced that it was preparing decisions within the framework of labor legislation, apparently referring to the dismissal of the artists. Once again, what for? For simply as the artists of classical ballet, in their free time, they participated in the Swan Lake Ballet. If you heard this as a passing funny story, you would laugh at it because you would think it's nothing but a product of imagination. It's only imaginable in funny stories, and in Ukraine this is nothing more than another example of primitive diversification imposed by the neo-Nazi regime in Kiev in all spheres of life. You know, I believe that they should follow through. When will they cancel the Mendeleev table in every sense? Because it's also a product of an enemy. How do we behave when Tchaikovsky is cancelled? Why are they not cancelling Mendeleev and his inventions? What is the nature of this? If they're truly taking a look at things, perhaps they should step away from this nonsense. But if they believe that staying dedicated in this track, then denazification, diversification, and then they decided that they're fighting imperialism. But if this is their true strategy, perhaps it should be applied everywhere. Why are they being selective? Where does it come from? That's because they understand they could lead to canceling themselves. including in those areas of life that are crucial and are fateful. But for now, there's still space to move around. They can cancel Tchaikovsky, they can prohibit Bulgakov, dismantle the commemorative tables to Tchaikovsky. But with Mendeleev, this could go on. The above facts confirm the relevance of the tasks of denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine and the elimination of threats emanating from its territory. As the Russian leadership stated, all these goals will definitely be achieved.
So here a surprising, actually bewildering statement, not only by the UN Secretariat, but it's coming from Secretary General of the United States. On the 29th of January, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres made an extremely strange statement about the principle of independence not being applicable to the situation with the Crimea and Donbass. It was after a thorough studying of this issue, as if we quote him. But that's the process we have mentioned before, where the personnel staffing of the UN Secretariat, people have been selected not according to their qualification and professionalism, but according to quotas at a certain stage. That gender tolerance implemented at a certain stage when professional figures were secondary, were at the third or at the last place. The main thing was political ideological compatibility, and the result is obvious. It seems that the UN lawyers do not exactly understand their tasks. They have not studied the Charter of the United Nations carefully, because the scope of the UN Secretary General does not include that state ownership of territories, but according to Article 100 of the Charter, they need to observe the principle of independence and abstain from any actions that could influence the position of international officials responsible only before the organization. Article 97 of the UN Charter also calls upon refraining from such engaged political statements and selective interpretation of the norms of the Charter. Incompetence in international law is obvious. I beg your pardon, but even the students of legal faculties know that there is no hierarchy in the principles of international law, and no law can prevail over another. This principle is enshrined in the Charter and in the Declaration on International Law Principles of 1970. The mentioned declaration includes the principle of territorial integrity that is so actively mentioned by Antonio Guterres, and the Office of Human Rights. They just not respect the principle of respect of the population residing on that territory, and that coup d'etat and Russophobic statements, they did not represent the Crimean, Donbass and Novorossiya residents. It was true genocide of the peaceful population of Donbass and erasing its Russian identity. Stefan Dujarric, official representative of the UN Secretary General, he said that the UN recognized the right of the people of Greenland for its self-determination. Actually, he distinguishes which people have certain rights. The Secretary General has turned into a conveyor of Western propaganda, actually. So what can we expect from Eleanor Hammarskjöld, a Swedish national? The state adhering to Russophobic policy. They ignore the principle of neutrality on which the authority of the UN is based. She is not aware of that, obviously. Now regarding the situation in Moldova, as the authorities of that country continue to adhere to anti-Russian policy, and Maria Zakharova made a statement during peace session, allegedly Russia having only one goal: to capture the parliament of the country, to establish the government controlled by the Kremlin, to destroy democracy, to engage it into the sphere of influence against Ukraine and against Europe. It's a quotation. Actually, it was a hypocrisy. It was called hypocritical in Moldova itself. They just ignored the horrible situation in socio-economic sphere and the situation with human rights. She only hears the European elites. They pay her and they are ready to prolong her credit further. As they say, it's a European anti-Russian project in essence. Brussels just prefers to hide its real result because it has been detrimental for Moldova. The country has been turned into an impoverished police state. If you need examples, but I think everyone sees that, everyone feels that actually, but I will cite an example. Contrary to the Sandu regime, we are ready to provide examples for our statements, real examples. It's the deprivation of autonomy status of Gagauzia. As you know, the head of the autonomy, Evgenia Gutsul, has been sentenced to 7 years in prison. And the former head of the National Assembly of Gagauzia, Dmitry Konstantinov, has been sentenced to 12 years of imprisonment. Actually, elections to Gagauz parliaments planned for 22nd of March were disrupted when the Supreme Court Chamber of Chisinau, it actually deprived the election commissions of Gagauzia of its authority. It's just further breaking, creating, splitting the Moldovan society. According to the National Bureau of Statistics from January to November 2025, the import to Moldova grew by 20% in comparison with the similar period in 2024, and export grew a little bit more than by 4%. That's how Chisinau is expected, awaited in the European Union, as they say. Its market has long been divided. And what they need to do is to find a new market for selling their own products and not to allow future competitors to that market. Actually, the Moldovan authorities, they deny. They just hide this option for themselves. They're just depriving their own producers of oxygen. The situation in energy is very complicated. The tariffs grew by 70% in 2024. Since 2021, the growth has been 150%. Regarding the renewable energy sources generation, Moldova has no money for such projects financing, because their main donor, the European Union, is not interested in the energy independence of the country. And Brussels decreased the amount of grants for Moldova for supporting the energy sector by 30%. According to some data, And experts conclude that Chisinau no longer depends on the Russian gas. They are proud of that, you see, but the remaining figures, I have cited them. Moldova has become yet another example that Russophobia is expensive and pointless. It's a road to nowhere, literally. We have drawn attention to certain statements by Volker Turk, Austrian representative, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Those statements were made on the 23rd of January during the 39th special session of the UN Council, Human Rights Council. It was for discussion of the worsening human rights situation in Iran. It was dedicated to pressure on Iran by the West, with the aim of worsening the economic situation in this country and stimulating the discontent of the Iranians. This session was devoted to the human rights situation in Iran. In itself, it sounds strange. A notable fact is that Volker Turk, as the UN Office for Human Rights, headed by him, in the states that are not favorable to the collective West, they draw attention to them, and apart from dubious assessments and statements, the UN official underlined that the recent protests were due to sharp growth in prices and the detrimental influence of foreign sanctions. I would like to draw attention once again to hypocrisy of Western countries who allegedly protect democracy, but actually it's just a rhetorical method concealing their predator neo-colonial policy for their dominance, preserving their dominance in the world. The unilateral economic measures imposed by them are aimed exclusively against the so-called authoritarian regime. Allegedly, they do not affect the population of those countries, but actually they do affect them, and that's what they are accounting for. The situation in Iran has demonstrated